Hi, so I'm Aoife Tunney. I'm the head of the Culture Office of the Creative Europe Desk Ireland. And today is our second webinar in the series Capacity Building. Today we're focusing on building communication and dissemination strategy with a particular focus on cooperation projects within the Creative Europe project. So I'm delighted to introduce to you Catherine Griffin, who will share her presentation in a couple of moments. She is our arts and consultant, communication consultant, so she's the expert in this area. We'll have some great input from her in a moment. And I'm just going to kick off the session today that's our agenda. So as I said, we've plenty of questions at the end. With an introduction to the Creative Europe Desk Ireland. So we have 3 offices across Ireland. So we have our media desk in Galway, our media desk in Dublin, and they manage everything to do with the media sub-programme, all information and calls. I'm Aoife Tunney and I'm based in the Arts Council at the head of the Culture Office, and we manage everything to do with the culture sub-programme. So what does the Culture Office do? Well, what we're doing today is part of the programme of events that will be led across the year, and that's looking at providing information, advice, assistance to potential Irish applicants to the Creative Europe programme. So this programme will be working at local, regional and national level, and we'll promote all calls across the country. We collaborate with key sectoral stakeholders and agencies, so working with other arts organisations, with resource organisations, and with agencies in Ireland. So we collaborate closely with the Creative Europe Desk Network as well, and that's around information sharing, research trips, and collaboration across borders. And within that kind of relationship, we also assist on partner search. So organisations can come to us with their details, and we'll help get a partner search going within the network and European organisations. We also work closely with our partners or our colleagues in the media office around cross-sectoral partnerships and events throughout the year. So just to briefly look at why the European Union funds culture. So really the direct impact is an intrinsic value, and that's directly on our social, cultural, political and economical life within the European Union. And that importance and that value is built directly into treaty commitments over the years, and also has links to broader EU policy. And there are policies such as the Agenda for Culture, the New Work Plan for Culture, Gender Equality Strategy, the European Green Deal, and the European Framework for Action and Cultural Heritage. So how does the European Union fund culture? Well, there's a number of ways. Through direct funding actions, European Capital of Culture, the prizes across popular music, architecture, literature, and cultural heritage. And there's also the centrally administered funding programme, and that's the Creative Europe programme we're in at the moment, 2021 to 27. We're just coming to the end of it, and across this programme, there was €2.44 billion allocated for media sub-programme, the culture sub-programme, and the cross-sectoral strand. So looking at the priorities for the culture sub-programme, it starts with resilience and recovery. And obviously coming out of COVID, this was key, rebuilding the creative and culture sectors in resilience and recovery and supporting them going forward. But again, we're in another kind of context now of war and the rising cost of living. So this has a direct impact on culture and creative organisations. So really the programme is again for supporting that. Innovation and joint creation, looking at innovation across the art form, job creation within those innovative methodologies, and joint creation or co-production across borders. Cooperation and exchange of practices, that's again those cooperation and collaborative exchanges of practices different practices within different European countries, different cultures, but also of best practice within whatever art form you're working in. Key players and multipliers, so that really looks at the key partners within your project, but also how that impacts the sector back in your country. So multipliers are the artists, the other organizations, and the other cultural practitioners that you will be working with on the ground. So having a direct impact on your sector here. And the capacity building of artists. So really, this is a mainstay of the Creative Europe program across all of its funding, building the capacity of artists, supporting them, professional development, and having that internationalization of their practice. So why are we talking about communication and dissemination today? In the context of the cooperation projects, your assessment criteria, and Catherine will look at this in more detail, but it allocates 20 out of 100 points within that assessment. So it is key for your application to consider a communication and dissemination, to build it into your project design, looking at how you will disseminate to participating organizations, artists, audience, and wider community. It's also important part of the funding so that you can see visibly the impact in the sector, and it has a long-lasting impact. So really, when you're looking to apply to Creative Europe or to cooperations, they want to see that you've thought that through, the impact over the longer term. And it's also key to show that your project has been co-funded by the Creative Europe program, that it is an international project. It has international partners across Europe. So thanks to Leona Cully, who is our communication manager, is joining us today. She shared with me these a series of projects from Irish partners who've really capitalized and captivated audiences with their communications strategies. So whether that's on social media, their Instagram, using short videos or posts, or else using other kind of forms of promotion and advertising. So these are a number of others. So they're different, larger organizations or smaller organizations. So they're interesting to have a look. So we'll share with them that with you afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Catherine. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah, thanks, Aoife.
Thanks, Catherine.
Right. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, we can.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me along this morning. So what we're going to be talking about this morning is kind of understanding what Creative Europe is looking for from your communications and dissemination strategy. So unpicking some of what they're asking for. And I'm going to be walking through a framework, which I think is going to be really helpful for you to use as you put your applications together. So first of all, just a little bit about me. I call it my career wander rather than a journey. I started off in the arts. That's very much where my heart is, and then did kind of an accidental 12-year detour working in multinationals, working in online advertising, really specifically there. And then since 2017, I've been back in the arts world where I'm happiest. And in that time, I have led public engagement for the National Gallery of Ireland, and I also spent a year within the Arts Council as interim communications director. And now I work across lots of organisations. So I do a lot of communications consulting, and I do strategy consulting, and I also work as a coach. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, so in terms of the Creative Europe application, so as Aoife mentioned, the dissemination piece is 20% of your marks. But so it is a good chunk, and I think it's really, really worth spending the time on. But I also think as you get to this point, you've probably done a lot of the hard work. And the bit I really want to think about today is how you really present that work as powerfully as you can to make sure you really maximize those 20 marks. So here's kind of a view of kind of what Creative Europe is asking for from your application. So this is the long blurb. If I were to summarize it, the key things that really jump out at me is that they're asking for a structure in this part of the application. They're really asking for you to signpost how you're thinking about your approach. They're also really asking you to think about the impact and making sure that you're really kind of maximizing the impact of your project, and you're thinking about who those target audiences are and who it's going to be most useful for. And then finally, they're looking for a realistic action plan. So they're looking for a set of actions that are going to support your ambitions. So that would be kind of my summary in terms of what they're looking for. Aoife kind of gave me some of the feedback, and this is where I feel a bit like a school teacher telling you guys off. But this is some of the constructive feedback that's come from Creative Europe around kind of the dissemination part of previous applications. And the reason I'm putting this up is as we work through the framework, I'm going to show you, I'm going to reference some of this feedback so that you can see where it fits into different parts of the framework. But really, again, what they're really looking for is they're looking for detail. They're looking for evidence that you guys have really thought about who your audience are, what you're trying to say, and what those goals are. They also really want to make sure it's realistic. And we'll talk a little bit about your goals and your budgeting as being incredibly important to give credibility to your application. And finally, they do talk about kind of where they've seen really positive ones. It's where there's a real collaborative communication strategy, where you've really described what you're going to do well, and where you have your target group corresponds with your marketing and communications plan. So before we kind of get into it, and I'm just going to ask you guys to do this yourselves on a piece of paper, or feel free to share it in chat. But just even if you guys take a moment to jot down some of your points to these questions, when you're thinking about your communication dissemination plans for Creative Europe applications, what are your main challenges? What are you finding hard? How long are you leaving for this? Like, where is this fitting within your kind of within your approach to the application? At what stage are you getting to this, and how is that working? So this is about you guys just taking a minute to think about that. And you might just kind of jot down a few points, which just could help kind of your thinking as we're working through this presentation. Okay, so how do we make this easier? So the long and short of it is use a framework. Why a framework? So basically using a communications framework, it helps you organize your thoughts. It helps you make sure you're asking the right questions and spotting any gaps in your approach. And it helps really show within your application that you have thought about these key areas. This is a standard communications strategy framework. We're going to talk about audience, message, goals, delivery. I'm really, really aware that some of your projects are very, very different, but this framework kind of will work in a lot of ways for any kind of communication that you're doing, because you're thinking about who am I talking to? What do I want to tell them? And how do I do that? How do I make sure I'm successful? So that's really kind of the fundamentals of it. And then as we work through that, I'm going to give you guys some tools and different approaches to kind of deepen your work within this framework. And as we go through, I'm going to use an example because I feel like it's easier to identify with this. I'm going to use the example of the Very Hungry Caterpillar Christmas show, which is already open for booking in my local theatre, which is the Pavilion Theatre in Dún Laoghaire, and it's going to be running over December and January. So as background, it's all ages, and it features a menagerie of 75 lovable puppets and charming music. And I can assure you that I'm going to be there with my Hungry Caterpillar superfan, who's 5 years old and very excited about it. Okay, so first of all, we are going to talk about audiences. So who are we trying to talk to? When we look at the feedback that came from Creative Europe, so two of the pieces they said, they're talking about, you had there were plans to attract big numbers, but we didn't really see how you were going to get to that. Or you just hadn't really thought about, there wasn't enough thought there around methodology and your target audiences and how you're actually going to reach that. So let's start off with, how do you actually define an audience? How does that work? So there's four key ways that we use to define an audience. The first is characteristics, like what are some of the statistics that we know about them? So where are they? Where are they in the world? Where are they in the country? Where are they in the county? How many of them are there? What language do they speak? What's their background? What type of education? So those all those kind of demographic factors. And then the second bit is how they feel about you. And it's a really interesting question to ask, because they're already on a good kind of positive level with you, or do they have no idea who you are? Or is there some negativity there that's kind of sitting there from something previous? And then we think about, where did they get their information from? So how do we reach them? And then finally, what do they need? So how can we make ourselves relevant to this audience? So I have put out some tools that you can use to help you dig into some of these pieces. And this is probably, as I go through it, this is the biggest piece of research that I'm really recommending that you do, is really spending the time looking at these tools. And we'll send out links to some of these tools at the end as well. So in terms of characteristics, if you're not aware, the Arts Council Audience Mapping Tool relaunched a couple of weeks ago, just at the end of May. It is super. If you want to know real numbers within areas of audiences, you get it broken down by age group, you get it broken down by how far away from venues they are, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Really, really helpful. And I'll show you in a minute how I've used that. The next piece is, again, the Arts Council National Arts Engagement Survey. So they have a massive amount of real tangible data that you can use in your application about the distribution of demographics across arts audiences. And then the next one is my favorite, and I'll show you a bit more about this. If you haven't come across datareportal.com, it's absolutely brilliant. And I'll show you a bit more about what they do there. There's a huge amount of information you can get out of there. The census, of course, is super helpful. And then finally, if you have audience data already, that's another really key place to be going to, especially if you have a history of engagement with your organization or with the project. Next, you're thinking about, well, how do they feel about you? So if you have audience data, that's a really good place to start. If you have social media channels up and running, that's a super place to start. But you can also get a sense of this from the Arts Council National Arts Engagement Survey. And there is another really, really helpful piece, which I'll mention a few times, which is the Performing Arts Forum, formerly known as Theatre Forum, Audience Insights Survey, and which they do in partnership with Indigo. And this goes into more detail. Where this differs from the National Arts Engagement Survey, the National Arts Engagement Survey is done via behaviour attitudes, and it is just everyone, like it is a broad stroke. The Performing Arts Forum survey is done for people who are already engaging with performing arts venues in Ireland. So that there are people who are already actively engaged in the arts. So then we go, well, where do they get their information from? Datareportal, but I'll show you a bit more about that and what you can get from that. But there's a huge amount in there. And then again, National Arts Engagement Survey, Performing Arts Forum. And we'll give you a lot of this information. So this will tell you how are people finding out about different events, where do people like to get their information from, where are people spending their time. And then finally, what do they actually need from you? Again, Performing Arts Forum survey has some helpful pieces in there about what people need, your own audience feedback and any social media comments. So what I've done is I've used this information to define my audience for the Hungry Caterpillar. So I've looked at the Pavilion Theatre, and I decided that I'm looking mainly at under fours who live within 30 minutes of the venue. And I'm using the Arts Audience Mapping tool to do that. The reason I said within 30 minutes is because I know that the Performing Arts Forum survey tells me that most people coming to a venue come from within 30 minutes. So I know that, so I can use that tool to get a really quite close number on it. So I know there's 55,000 under fours living within 30 minutes of the venue. I can extrapolate that there's maybe 100,000, or maybe reduce that down if I wanted to be a bit more conservative, ticket buyers. I'm using the census to tell me that the average age of giving birth in Ireland is 33. So I'm saying, okay, so I've got a rough idea of my age band and how many people are within this. And then I can see through Arts Audience Mapping their socioeconomic background as well. Then I think, well, how do they feel about me? Well, I know from my Performing Arts Audience Insights that people are already feeling pretty positive about performing arts and venues that they're already connected with. I also look at the National Arts Engagement Survey and find out their main barrier is finding time. So that's one of the biggest things I want to get into. Then I look at Data Reportal and National Arts Engagement Survey and the Performing Arts Insight. And that tells me that my target group is mostly using the internet for finding information, and Instagram is their primary one, followed by Facebook. So if I want to get information to this group, that's primarily where I want to get them on. I also know the family and friends recommendations, venue email lists and websites are very, very strong follow-up sources. So in terms of what they need, I know this is a time poor audience because I'm in it. And I know that they need a strong and emotional why, and I need it to feel easy to book. And they want lots of advance notice because they want to book in advance. And then I also know that they're really interested in the value of the performance as well. And again, Performing Arts Audience Insights is telling me that. So within your application, you're able to reference specific reports. You're not just, it's not opinion based. You can link it back to an actual report. So I talked about datareportal.com. If you haven't come across this, please do have a look at it. It's really, really helpful when putting applications together or doing any communications planning. It has basic population statistics, so you don't necessarily need to go to the census for it. It has it within that. It tells you quite a lot of detail about social media usage by platform and by demographics, how long people are spending on it, which ones do they like, more than other ones, how are they using them. But it also tells you about media usage, which is helpful. So if you're also thinking about your broadcast TV or radio or press online or print, music streaming, podcast, it's going to give you specific numbers that you can put in your application around this to support why you're choosing a particular channel. And it also has pieces like if you're looking outside Ireland, it has some travel and tourism data, and if there's anything around kind of digital content, there's pieces around that. And it's not just Ireland, it's every country globally, and it's free. So that's my top tip in terms of looking for data to really strengthen your application. And this is just a screenshot of one of the slides on it, one of the many slides. So the next piece I want to talk a little bit about is messaging. This is really, I think a lot of people skip this point, and I would really encourage you to spend time on it because it is really at the heart of what you want your audiences to understand about your project. And I'd say whatever you're doing, it's important to do. So your messages are basically your connection between you and your audience. So it's making sure that your audience, you're thinking about what your audience what you want them to know about you, how you want them to feel about you, and what you want them to do. And like I even did this before I came on this call. So this is something I use in communications all of the time. But being able to actually boil down your project, whatever you're working on, into one simple sentence is absolutely critical. And it will make such a difference to not just your communications strategy, but actually your entire application. So I thought about my Hungry Caterpillar. I want my audience to know that there is a high quality production of Hungry Caterpillar running over Christmas. I want them to feel nostalgic, excited, sense of urgency to get it booked. And I want them to book tickets and to tell their friends and family. So I boiled this down into my key message that what we have is a joyful production of a much loved classic in your local theatre for a limited time this Christmas. Now, this isn't my copy. If I'm writing copy for my messaging, I'm going to build it on top of that. So I'm going to try and build that around some of those key points in that tone of voice. But it's a foundational piece. So once I got my audience and message together, then I'm going to move on to my goals. And again, we're coming back to some of the feedback from Creative Europe, where some of the feedback that they're saying is that the strategy is too vague or can't be evaluated. And that's pointing towards an application where there aren't specific goals. And we'll talk a little bit about goal structures in a minute. They're also kind of touching on the idea that they don't have evidence of how the EU side of it is going to be made clear. Or they're saying that the external communication is underdeveloped. So what they're saying is the idea is there, but the how isn't there. And that's really kind of comes into goals and delivery. So within goals, sorry, it's trying to get rid of something on my screen, but within the communications plan goals, I mean, you're effectively looking at the idea of those SMART goals. And it really does all come back to this. Are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they relevant? And are they time bound? And it's just worth sense checking absolutely every goal against them. In terms of why you want them, it helps you decide where you're going to spend your time. It helps you think about, how do I match up the resources that I have against my ambitions? It also makes you decide what not to do. Very, very often we start with plans, we have loads of great ideas. And inevitably, once we think about how much resources we actually have, we strip that right down. So it's about really, really prioritizing. And then these goals should be supporting your audience and your message, which you've already developed. So I always say, the key question when you're putting your goals together is, at the end of the strategy, what do you want to have accomplished with your communications efforts? So some of the examples might be raising awareness around an initiative or an issue, driving attendance, increasing engagement. Always think about kind of specific but wide-reaching goals. So that will help you prioritize your communications effort and then really link into how they're going to deliver the project. So my goals for the Hungry Caterpillar, I put 3 together. So my first one I wanted to put was, I want to secure 30% bookings by September. Every time I write a goal, I say, why this goal? So it's really clear why this is important. So why this goal? Because my audience is time poor and likes to plan. So I know that there's a behavior there that I want to encourage, but I also know that early bookings are going to drive word of mouth. So this is going to benefit my overall kind of plan. Second, I want to fill 10 schools performances pre-Christmas, because I know there's lots of schools in the area. Why? Because block bookings are efficient. It's a great way to get the run kind of booked up quite early on, but also they're going to drive word of mouth. So that's going to drive some of my family bookings later in the run. And then my third goal is I'm pretty confident that this is going to be a well-booked run. So I also want to think about, what are some of the other things that I can do to maybe build positivity around my venue, around a show, around kind of brand awareness? So I'm going to say, look, I want to build in a collaboration with partners on something that's socially beneficial in the area. So why? Because I know my audience is really values driven and I know there's a strong local need. So now we're going to get into delivery. So what does that look like? So again, lots of feedback coming in around this, and it's around the details of what they're asking for. Is the detail of the delivery plan matching up to your goals? So you've said, I want to reach this audience, but have you said how you're going to do it? And have you said what budget is going to be assigned to that? So this is a lot about the specifics, and especially if you are thinking about quite large numbers, large audience numbers are hard to reach, and if you're planning to reach them with advertising, there needs to be quite big budget behind that. So it's being very, very specific about what your actual actions are going to be to deliver this plan. Whenever we're thinking about delivery, we think about these areas, resources, and I always think about resources in 2 areas. It's not just money. It is also about time. Your time is important. The time that you spend on communications is time you're taking away from something else. So you want that time to be really, really well spent. And you also want to be really realistic about what can be done. And if it can't be done within the current project team, do you need to assign budget to hire somebody else in to help with this? The second piece is around budget. And again, this comes down to, if I have big aspirations around reaching a national audience or a really large number of people, I need to have the budget behind that to support it. And then we go back to some of our planning, which is, where is my audience? What channels are they on? How expensive are those channels? How can I make sure that I am lining those channels up? So all the work that we've previously done around audience definition, around thinking where they get their information, where they're spending their time, this all comes back now to the delivery plan. because if I know my audience are really getting a lot of their information from Instagram, I'm going to make Instagram a part of my delivery plan. I love to also think about partnerships. It's in terms of kind of, if you are struggling to reach a new audience, thinking about people you can partner with who can speak on your behalf can be an incredibly effective way to do that as well. But primarily, we're trying to design actions that are supporting the goals. So that there'll be kind of supporting actions for each goals. Next, I think about, well, what are my tools? What can I use to do this? We've got public relations. And again, if you're trying to reach a very specific audience or a new audience, public relations is really, really helpful, but it also needs budget behind it. Email newsletters as well, depending on your setup and your relationship with your audience. We also have social media, we have advertising. So you can be thinking digital, radio, you can think of streaming providers. Podcast is, a huge growth area for online advertising at the moment. And then there's obviously this kind of broadcast TV, streaming TV, and press. And then you also have events. Definitely don't overlook events if it's applicable to your project as a way to promote it and a way to reach new audiences as well. You can get really creative around that. And then finally, as I said, partnerships. So I put together, this is a very, very high level delivery plan. So these actions are not specific enough because this is not a real life plan. I would expect these actions to be supported with 3 areas: budget, how much is this going to cost, timing, how long is it going to take, when are you going to do it, and targets. What are your target audiences? What are your target metrics? So just to put some piece around that. But really what you can see I'm doing is I am taking my goal and I'm supporting it with specific actions. And as I said, you're really trying to make this as specific as possible. So within my first goal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do targeted social media advertising, because that's a way I can be really sure to reach that particular group. And I can also use my newsletter, which I might have segmented, which would be brilliant. In schools, I may have a segmented schools newsletter already. I may do a couple of schools visits, and I might do some targeted social media advertising as well. And then for my social collaboration, I might choose to partner with an organization to deliver fruit to local schools, and also to put like targeted or free kind of subsidized school visits. So again, it's giving them very specific and measurable actions that you're going to take that can be then kind of followed up on. Because I work a lot within social media focus, I'm just going to spend 3 slides just talking about something which is dear to my heart, which is about the delivery of content on social media. Okay, intuitively, when we put pieces up on social media, this is what we think happens. We think, I put up my post, I have 5,000 followers, and just intuitively, we just visualize that going to all of our followers, which sadly isn't happening and hasn't happened for a long time, and it's getting more and more difficult. This is what actually happens, is you put your post up and it goes through a huge number of algorithms, and what's actually happening is on average, about 5% of your followers will see your post. Now, that is the overall average. I will say that arts and culture organizations have a natural advantage here, because people want to see your content more than they want to see kind of brand-driven content. So that's really helpful. But you still have to fight really, really hard to make your content seen without paying for it. There are things, and we'll send these around after, so I'm not going to read through each of these. But these, again, this is kind of coming from Meta. These are ways that you can be more confident that people are going to see your content. So there are ways that you can create content that's more likely to get in front of your followers and new audiences as well. But if you want to be confident that your content in social media is connecting with your audience, you need to use advertising. It doesn't need to be a huge amount. You don't need a massive budget. You can define that within what's available to you. But increasingly, year on year, it's just getting harder and harder to reach audiences without advertising. So that's just my public announcement is please do build in budget for social media advertising, and don't assume that any channels that you have set up will be effective by themselves. Okay, and finally, measurement. So when you're thinking about your metric, it's good to think about what can I measure? What am I going to have data on? What's easily available to us? If it's a real life event, obviously you have attendance. If you have past events to build evidence from, you can use that as a way to set yourself targets. Online reach, again, I would really ask people to think more about reach and engagement rather than followers, because you could have 5,000 followers and your average post reach might be 200. So really think about kind of setting your online reach and engagement. But it's a lovely way, I think, that you can support a project that you're doing. If it is a real life project, you can say, but I'm also reaching this broader audience through my online reach and engagement. And then if you have a very specific audience in mind for your project, which a lot of arts projects do, there might be a very specific audience that you're trying to get in front of. The type of metrics that you can use to support this would be online advertising. So that will tell you how many of that within that demographic you're getting to. You can use public PR. You can also use partnerships, and they can all give you very specific metrics around your target audience. So in summary, this is kind of what the whole kind of what it looks like when it all comes together. So when I finished kind of working on a plan with somebody, we will have a defined audience, we'll have our key message, and we'll have a set of goals with delivery plans against each. And this will all be underpinned with measurement. I tend to advise keeping your goals short, or trying to keep to a small number of goals for a couple of reasons. I always think it's helpful to remember what's in your communication strategy. It's a really good starting point, because if you can't remember what's in it, nobody else is going to remember. And keeping it to a small number of goals helps that. But it also really keeps you focused on what's important and saying what's really going to cut through on this project. And if I'm only going to spend my time on these kind of 3 or 4 areas, this is what I really want to prioritize. And then within that kind of you can go into more detail then on your delivery plan on the how. And then, I'm putting this up for you guys to today, but I'm sure you kind of all have lots and lots of questions. When I'm working with clients, this is the structure we use, but we spend a massive amount of time asking questions, researching, going back and forth, testing ideas. So this is a process that does take time, and will be more effective the more time that you can put into it. So as we kind of finish, and I think we're going to open it up for some Q&A now, I want you to also think about now, is there anything kind of that surprised you from today? Anything you're going to do differently in your next application? So anything that's jumping out at you that you're really going to make a note of straight away? But also, what are your kind of lingering questions, things that we didn't cover? And I know we're going to have some time for some Q&A.